All right, so episode 2, I guess. It's wild. So I yeah, I recorded the last one and I edited it up and I'm like, this is a podcast. It's kind of cool. And I'm like, well, I might as well upload it tonight. So I did, and I came up with the name, A Drummer's Journey. We joked on stream about how it should be called like, get off my lawn or don't touch my drum set, which we might change the name. I don't know. Those are kind of funny because it's going to be, I guess, like a mixture of my rants as a drummer and just kind of like old man ramblings. But for those of you who did reach out that listened, thank you for the feedback. It means the world. I'm going to be pretty open about a lot of stuff on here, of stuff I've gone through, and if hopefully I can help someone, that'd be cool, and just talk drumming and all the things. So yeah, thank you for listening. Episode 2. Today we're going to be talking about interference, I guess. I spoke a lot last episode about how when I took the pillow out of the kick drum and wide open, it kind of changed everything. And it's true. It made me look at all kinds of different things. Really made me like stop and kind of take a step back from what I was doing just day to day. And a couple things, and we'll talk about these, I think, in different segments. But the focus of today, I kind of want to talk about how we hear ourselves or how we perceive ourselves, especially as drummers. We have in-ears, we have, monitors, stage monitors, we have headphones. There's all kinds of things that we do to kind of protect our ears from our instrument when it's loud. And, but we'll get into like room sound and, microphones and tunings, and that's like later on. We'll talk about it. But one of the first things I noticed once I really started playing with open tuning was the microphones were just doing all these picking up all this extra stuff, like overtones and more of the room. It wasn't as focused, I guess, when the drums are real dead and like punchy and just blip, bloop, blop. My dog, Toby, he's here scratching the carpet. And it really made me, just kind of stop and think for a second, like, okay, well, something's not right. And I talked about how I took the microphone out of the kick drum and put it in the front with another, I think it was like a condenser. I think I had a KSM 32 or something. So I put 2 microphones right on the front, and they were canceling each other out, like hardcore phase cancellation. And the kick just sounded like ting, ting. And I'm like, this sucks. What the heck? This sounds terrible. But, it really made me look at recording in a different way, which made me honestly go all the way back to when I first started kind of playing drums. Most of us start with, we get a drum set, our parents go, this is crazy, super loud, and they don't want us to go deaf, so they get us like, headphones, like gun muffs, or I used to have them for mowing the lawn, or like riding the tractor or something, just muffs that like cover your ears, right? And I had those for years. It was, if I was going to play drums, I put those on, and it's like an instant God mode compressor. Like, you sound so good, especially when you're just starting out. Your drums aren't tuned right. You have no idea how to set them up or tune them right, and your cymbals are just some cheap starter pack or whatever. But you put those things on, oh man, you got that boom, and the psh, like everything is just, it's like Instamix. It's amazing. And I played with that for like years, and every time I played with bands in high school or any kind of performance, it was just, all right, headphones off, this is rock and roll or punk, whatever, and it's loud, and you just, like, I don't know, when you're young, your ears can take it. You just like soak it up, right? Fast forward, when I moved to California and started music school, I was like, yeah, my ears, I got to take care of them, right? Because that's all your teachers, all your classmates, everyone else is like, you see them wearing, earplugs and all kinds of stuff, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Well, I went a step further, and I got, I guess the next journey in how I hear myself were those Vic Firth like they're gun muffs, but they got speakers in them, right? Nothing fancy. I think I got them at Guitar Center on Sunset for like $50, maybe 40, something like that. Nothing crazy, but it was essentially for me to hear a metronome while I was playing, you know, because you can't hear it just mashing and bashing in those practice rooms at MI. And I would put my CD player on too, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can like play the music with headphones on, not just like blaring it through some like PA system or stereo system from the house like I used to do. Like, this is really cool. I remember in high school, I had like, maybe some of you remember it, but it was like the small headphones. You know, they didn't like cover your ears, but they just kind of went over. They didn't really have like in-ears like they do now. I guess they do, but they kind of sucked. But I remember I took those apart and I would tape them to my ears and then put the gun muffs over it. So it was kind of like the Vic Firth headphones were like, whoa, this is wild. And they were isolation too. So you got that like God mode drum sound. Plus you could play along to, I don't know, I was playing to Tool and all kinds of stuff. It was like next level, right? But I couldn't really hear my drums. And this is what I'm getting at. This whole thing is the journey that we go on. And think of, this is probably 4 to 5 years of playing, practicing, you know, a lot of hours a day, but with this interference, right? Like something getting in the way of actually hearing what you're doing. And it's hard as a drummer, right? If you're playing guitar, playing piano, like there's not a big disconnect, you know. I try to think of it like I know a couple people who have hearing impairments, and it's like they have trouble developing speech because they can't properly hear what they're saying. So like the brain, it's interesting how that all works. And I kind of thought about like, you know, last summer, like, man, I'm hearing my drums, and we'll get to it in a little bit, just differently than I think how I'm really sounding. And it really made me look at my playing. But we'll go back to college. Graduated, do all the things, start playing in bands. And again, you know, you're playing the whiskey, headphones off, right? You're not going to play the whiskey with headphones in. At least I knew about in-ear monitors at the time, but, you know, there's no way I could have afforded that stuff back then. It was like, oh my gosh, how much do these cost? It's not that they were new to the scene, but, you know, that was like, man, that was super pro level. They weren't readily available like they are today. Maybe they were, I just didn't know it, but I'm pretty sure they were a lot more expensive. So I just kind of went with that, like, all right, I'll just put earplugs in for band practice when it gets real loud and you just hear that muffled, right? If you do that over the microphone, it's kind of what you sound like, but you're still playing. And I remember when I first got my first set of in-ears, it was those Shure 215s or whatever, like the $100 Shure in-ears. I got it for one of the wedding bands I was playing in. We all wore like a monitor system, and I was like, holy crap, I can hear, you know, I played the backing tracks and click tracks. Like I can hear like the music, and I could hear the PA, the mix going through. The drums, we didn't mic up like each drum, so I could hear my drums through the vocal mics and stuff, but it was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. I hadn't gotten into recording yet. This is just simply like my first taste of like, oh, a monitoring system. This is cool. I had done like festivals and tours, but it was like just you know, the live monitors on stage. They're like, do you have in-ears? I'd be like, no. They'd be like, cool, good luck. Sorry for your ears. But that's just the way it was in the early 2000s for me. And then fast forward, I got into recording and all that, and I knew nothing about it. I just ordered my first mics and interface and all that and just set it up. And, you know, as most of us do, we learn as we go, kind of watch videos and kind of get as much info as we can about it. But it's kind of like you're just, as a drummer nowadays, like you got to learn that stuff. It's part of it. I mean, I really don't think you can get away with it nowadays without really learning how to mic yourself up, unless you're just like a god and, you know, then you're good. Anyways, I got like a first taste of like hearing my drums constantly. I would be in a recording studio and get chances to, you know, where cans, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. The drums sound great. But, you go home, you go to your practice room, you just didn't have that. So, you start hearing yourself through a very mediocre audio engineer's ears, which would be yourself or me. I'm like, I don't know how to mix. I don't know what compressors do. So you just start shoving microphones and blending and blowing your ears, and you go from, like, at least for me, I went from muffling to now I've got this like barrage of sound coming in. So it was probably even louder than my actual drum set was in these like $99 Sures. But what I wanted to get at really is like how much I think that hindered me, both learning with just constant, muffling, maybe not like vocabulary wise, like with my drumming, like I knew I was hitting a snare tom, like what you're doing. But I think my dynamics personally took a big hit, or a sense of touch, right? I talked last week about like how, I was either just hitting like really loud or really soft. Those were my main dynamics, and especially the genres I was playing. And taking that kick drum off, it made the mic sound completely different, right? You got much more overtones, especially you took, I tried to open up the toms too. Like, I'm going to do a jazz tuning because it's cool and trendy. Yeah, it just made my mix sound like complete trash because it was not made for that, right? It was just tight and made to be just beat the snot out of it, like that kind of mix. And I kind of was really thinking like my dynamics suck. I'm not really in control of this drum set. When I'm hitting the snare, when I'm hitting the toms, it's just ringing like crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm hearing this just really loud, terrible mic sound from a close tom mic that's resonating like crazy in my ears. That made me want to play quieter, right? Just the way I was mixing, how I was hearing myself was really affecting how I was playing. And that's kind of the whole theme of today is like, I really took a minute and go, okay, I really got to get this figured out because I think I've really hindered myself for way too long with the way that I'm monitoring my playing personally. And you could take a look at what you're doing too. Some things that I thought about were, the muffling thing. If you don't have any kind of monitoring system now, like you just play, I just put my phone plugs in or whatever, and I let it rip. If you're cool with that, awesome. But if you notice like you're overplaying, maybe when you don't really need to, like you're just like, you're finishing every practice session, you're like, I am super sore, probably in all the wrong ways. I feel like I just like got hit by a truck. You're probably like really, really overplaying just to get sounds that you're trying to get through to your ears. Like your ears want to hear just a killer rim shot sound, right? But when you have the gun muffs in, it sounds a little muffled. So what do? You play harder. Cymbals, you hit a cymbal. This was my problem. I would hit cymbals. I'm like, well, I can't really hear that. So I beat the snot out of, man, I used to have like the Z Customs. They were like 4 cymbals nowadays thick, those Zildjian Z Customs. Oh, the early 2000s, late 90s. They were so loud and they were so heavy. But I used to beat the snot out of them because you couldn't really like, they were so thin, but if you really hit them, they kind of sounded really beefy. So I would overplay like crazy. Just to hear myself. Then when you get like a taste of like monitors and miking yourself, of course, drummers you think about it. When you first started playing drums, it's like you want bigger drum sets, more cymbals, more splashes, more whatever, more toms. When you start recording, I think most people, or at least miking your drum set, I was this way. I'm like, I need to mic everything because I saw pictures of studios. I was watching videos. I'm like, oh my God, I need like 2 snare mics, tom mics, overheads, rooms, 2 for kick. I need like maybe bottom mics. I'm like thinking like I need like 80 channels. That's what they do in the professional world. So I was micing everything up, not really knowing what I was doing. And if you really don't know about mixing, and I say this very lightly, I'm still learning like a ton. There's so much to learn, but it's a balancing act, especially for a drum set. There's so much happening noise-wise, And depending on where the mics are placed and how close they are, you can get phase interference. You can get just all kinds of like dynamic craziness, which really affects your perception. For me, I noticed like I just started not hitting toms as hard as I should, right? Because I'm like, oh, it's mic'd. Dung, sounds great. If I just kind of like, I could play the snare nice and strong and I go play my fills, boom, boom. And I knew I wasn't giving it 100% with the toms, but they sounded good, you know? Most of the time I'm thinking, they'll probably replace this anyway. I was getting lazy. Just because of the way I was hearing it. I'm like, well, it sounds good in my ears. They'll turn it up. It's fine. And that's a really crappy way to think about it. And I haven't really had in-ears, custom in-ears for a long time. I had a little taste of them in a band I was in, and they broke somehow. I don't remember just use or just mishandling of them for me, but last summer I really wanted to get some in-ears so I could really isolate the sound of the drum set, really work on my mix, and I was going for, not just with the room, but with the microphone choice of having the room, like if I took my in-ears out and played and then put my in-ears in and played, I wanted it to sound exactly the same, both dynamically, sonically, just maybe a little quieter, right? I didn't want to hurt my ears if I wanted to get loud, but I didn't want it, like I couldn't hear myself if I wanted to just play soft. So really deep diving into mic technique, mixing techniques, and getting a good set of in-ears. That was the goal, and I got that. And I gotta say, it just really, like this whole thing that I'm kind of, I joke, like the drummer, it's my drummer midlife crisis where, you know, playing heavy all the time, like just playing rock and like hard country and just like rim shot, rim shot, rim shot. It's cool. I get it. But I'm like, it's just not what I'm hearing in my head from my playing, especially the stuff I was listening to. Talked today on stream about it. Someone asked like, well, you know, what were you listening to? And it was like that modern rock kind of stuff that I used to love. I just turn it up in the car and crank it. And now I'm just like, it's just, you know, I'm old again, yelling from the porch, get off my lawn. But it's really made me want to play like the way I want to play. And the way I want to play and the things that I get most joy out of nowadays is listening to music where the drums sound like drums. They sound real. Like you can hear the room that the drums are in. You know it's a real drum set. The snare, every time it's hit, sounds kind of different. The toms got different dynamics. Every fill's different, as opposed to the albums that I used to make all the time and songs to record. And what I used to love was like every snare was perfect. Like it just sounded the same. Every kick drum sounded the same. So you learn the patterns, you learn what the hands are doing, and you're good to go, right? Again, two dynamics, really one with the kick drum, all like just bury the beater as hard as you can, learn the pattern. That's not super crazy. Snares, and then learn the quiet ghost note pattern. Other than that, just hang on tight with, you know, whatever the right hand is doing. Most of the fills are the same too, you know, you know. But I really started to appreciate stuff that I never would think about ever, you know, like older music, like stuff from the 50s, 60s, really getting into jazz. A lot of the modern reinterpretations of like music from back then, but just like the band's all recording at the same time. You can tell it's like one or two mics on the drum set, but the drummer's playing really good, right? If you're playing with, this is again, that less is more thing. As a drummer, you know, I went out and bought all those microphones and didn't really know what I was doing. So I'm mixing stuff, putting videos up online. It sounds awful listening back to it now. There's so much phase issues going on. You know, you can barely hear the tone of the snare because I got two overheads, all the mics are bleeding in, the hi-hat's pointed right at the snare. I'm like, if I could go back and tell myself a couple things, it would be like, learn how to mix better. You know, I waited too long to really sit down and take the time to make sure that what I was hearing in my ears when I played was what I was really playing physically. Again, it's like you're talking through this instrument, and your brain knows what it's trying to say, but it needs a return signal. It needs something to reinforce the ideas. So if your brain isn't hearing what it thinks it's saying on the drum set, it might think like, oh, well, I thought it was this, but it sounds crazy loud. You're not really gaining. You're not getting anything from it. You're just like contradicting what you're saying and what you're hearing and what you're playing. You know, your brain just kind of goes, okay, this is happening. It's really not natural, but let's get through it. Same goes if it's too quiet. Like if you're muffled, it's like, well, I think I'm hitting a really cracking rim shot, but maybe if I hit harder, and you overcompensate, for maybe something you don't need, which affects your playing. It really does. It affects your control. And it's just that fuzziness, that interference, right? The definition of what technique really means, it's not how you look, but it's how clearly you get your ideas out. Some people talk like some drummers, the drummer his technique's terrible or whatever. But man, if they're killing it, if they're playing exactly what's in their head so naturally, that is like the perfect technique, right? It doesn't matter how you look. It does, I guess, right? If you want to play like certain things fast or, whatever, we know certain techniques do work. But what I'm getting at is like, if they kind of like twist up a little bit when they're playing, like that's cool. Like if their body's really feeling it and that's how it comes out, I think that's cool. So I got my in-ears, my, custom molded in-ears, could really, really close off, the isolation from like the actual kit, and I could really hear the mix I was doing. The first time I put it in, I'm like, oh my God, my mix is so bad. Right? It really makes a big difference because you can mix on monitors and stuff, but like you got to like really, what are you going to hear when you're sitting in the hot seat? What is really coming in there and how is that affecting your playing? A lot of drummers adapt to like bad headphone mixes in studios. Drummers who are in studios constantly, you just get used to being like, I can't hear anything, but whatever. I get it. I know what I'm doing. And I could do the same thing, right? Like we can all get through songs. We all know what we're doing. But I'm talking about like if you're really trying to gain control, dynamics, and feel with what you're doing, really stop and take a look at how you're monitoring yourself, or how you're hearing yourself. It could be through a video camera, like you could be recording, practices, or if you have just one microphone, like make sure it's in a good spot. Don't over compress things. Don't, boost all this crazy stuff, because it might sound cool to put out there, and it might fit the genre that you're trying to go for, which is cool. But really make sure it doesn't affect what you're trying to get out on the drum set, because it does interfere. I really do. And that's talking about just like I don't know, again, I talk about this on stream a lot, but the older I get, the less I'm impressed by a lot of like the modern music, that I would have been probably 10 years ago. Like, oh my gosh, this is so good. It's perfect, right? It's overlooked with the fine-tooth comb. The drum sounds are immaculate, right? It's just perfect. But there's no magic. Like anybody can do that now. Anyone can program it, So it's kind of like, Again, drummer rant, old man rant, but that's just one of the things that this past year I've really had to take a look at my playing. And I think one of the biggest roadblocks for me going to that next step was just how I was mixing myself, how I was monitoring myself to compensate for my crappy playing. That's the honest truth, right? I'm like, I'm playing all kinds of different songs on stream and I'm recording different stuff every day. If I just leave my compressor set to just, if I hit it hard, it's going to sound good, we're cool, right? Not really worrying about like how I'm hitting it super much. Same with toms and the kick drum. It's like, there's set it and forget it presets you could do, or just once you get it dialed in, you don't really touch it. But that makes you play a very narrow way. We could talk about like what I've been doing. I went from 16 microphones on my drum set. Like today I had 3. And I just have a stereo overhead, which is AEA R88. I have a Stager SR1A ribbon mic kind of in the center of kit, or like the crotch, and the D12 VR on the kick drum. And it's like you hear all those microphones, if you learn about pickup patterns and proximity and what they're doing, like I'm getting room sound, I'm getting snare, I'm getting the toms, I'm getting the kick, everything I need without having to like over compress anything like crazy. There's just a little bit of compression on like a master bus and a little of EQ, like a little high end boost, just to kind of make it sizzle nice because the ribbons are a little dark. But man, my mix, it sounds like my kit. And every time I'm playing different dynamics with the snare, I hear those dynamics rather than what I used to do in Logic was like throw on a compressor, crank it up, crazy ratio, and just bop. All right, cool. Sounds like a Breaking Benjamin snare. Oh, that's what I want. Throw some reverb on there. Oh man, I sound great. It's very easy to do that, and to get sucked into like, oh, I'm good. Like I'm making the snare sounds, but is it really coming out the way you want it to when all those kind of, I don't want to say crutches, but all that like, I don't want to say makeup either, but once that makeup's gone and you're left with like the raw stems, how do they really sound, and what you're hearing in your ears, are you really happy with, is your brain really going to respond to that return signal and go, yep, that's what we were trying to say. Awesome. Because that's when I think you really start making progress is, when your brain just starts to get confidence. Like, all right, I'm sending this out. It's coming back. Cool. Let's keep going. But if it's just constantly in this loop of like, ugh, I'm fighting this thing and it gets all messed up, just something to think about. I know, drummer rant, but I'm not as tired today. And I'm very excited to talk about more things. But thank you for listening. This is episode 2. A lot of like cool little things I want to talk about in the future. So let me know what you think. And yeah, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.